6 big things heading into training camp, and none are bigger than the questions about the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll start with that here on Locked On NFL.
The barbershop is open and Tony Wiggins has a chair for you. He's ready with some real NFL talk. The local experts of Locked On bring their expertise, and Wiggy is ready with his clippers and shears. Sit down and enjoy. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yep, that's right. It's your team every day here on Locked On NFL. We thank you for making us your first listen. Welcome to the Barbershop. I am Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On NFL Barbershop show that comes on here in the afternoon, where we go through some of the biggest stories around the league. And when there aren't big stories, we'll figure out a way to find some like we did today. We're going to head into training camp. We're going to take the 6 biggest stories that we can think about. And I said we because I'm joined by Matt Williamson of Peacock and Williamson podcast and one of the founding members of Locked On NFL, just like I am every Friday. And we hope to navigate you through the show today. Here are the teams we're going to look at in reverse order: Cleveland, Washington, the Bengals, Bears, Lions. We're going to start with Pittsburgh since they had so many big additions. But first, I got to let you know, wherever you get your podcast, make sure you check into that location each and every day, because we will be there whether you watch or listen. And today's show and this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. You need to take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. All right, Matt, let's not bury the lead. Everybody knows that you're in the building up there in Pittsburgh. A lot has happened. Not only Aaron Rodgers, Jalen Ramsey, DK Metcalf. There's a lot going on, man. This is a different offseason. So set us up and tell us how this offseason has affected the way people normally feel about how Pittsburgh goes about things. And then we're going to hear from Locked On Steelers. And when we do that, I'm going to come back and tell you, I got a little surprise for you why I think this thing is going to work. But how does it feel being in that building and being around there every single day and having all of these things happen in one off season, because it's not characteristic?
Yeah, and frankly, everyone thinks they're so set in stone. This organization never changes. Wig, I'm 52 years old. I've seen 3 head coaches in my life. But when the GM changed from Kevin Colbert, who I respect a great deal, but frankly, his last 5 drafts or so were flat out poor, to Omar Khan, things dramatically changed. They're much more analytically inclined. They're very more salary cap oriented. They've been in search for a quarterback, so there's a lot more change in this organization than people understand. But one thing remains the same is, as long as the Rooneys own the team, any word like tanking or taking a step back just isn't going to exist. I mean, I know people around here hate that, but if it was 2-11 and week 13, I have a feeling they've never experienced that. You know what I mean? So anyway, so what they're trying to do is walk a very fine line this offseason of trying to compete in the playoffs. They consistently get to the playoffs, and then they get their doors knocked off by Mahomes or Allen or Lamar or whomever. They want to compete in the playoffs this year while setting themselves up to draft a quarterback in the first round next year. And I think they've done a phenomenal job of that. That doesn't mean they're going to win the Super Bowl and land the next Josh Allen next year, but they have tons of cap space. They have a year for this offseason coming up, as well as the offseason after that. They have tons of extra picks from the George Pickens trade, as well as comp game, which they never used to play the comp game. Now they're loaded with comp picks. And they've fortified the lines of scrimmage through the draft in the last 2 years to prepare for this quarterback. But in the meantime, Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, those guys aren't getting any younger. So if you can luck into an Aaron Rodgers revival, and that's kind of Tomlin's deal, get some proud, tough guy, big mentality, superstar type dudes, Metcalf, Ramsey, etc., and make a run while you prepare for it. That's the plan. It's not an easy one to pull off.
Yeah, it has been a little different. I'm going to listen to Locked On Steelers real quick, and then we'll come back and I'll give you a prediction on what I think is going to happen in Pittsburgh.
The most volatile position in football is corner. You know who hasn't been volatile ever in his career? Jalen Ramsey has never heard of a down season. He's never had one. You look at all of his stats, passer rating, targets allowed, his splash plays, his EPA per play, success rate, whatever you want to look at. Look at the tape. Everything checks off. This guy is still a good football player, and he is a versatile chess piece. And I think that's what really allures the Steelers about this trade is he can do so many different things for them in more than Minkah, which says a lot because Minkah did so much. Jalen Ramsey can do all that much more and open up possibilities for other people on their defense.
I am not on the train that somehow Jalen Ramsey is falling off. I don't know where that came from. There were people that were preferred Jair Alexander over Jalen Ramsey, and Alexander's missed a whole bunch of the last 2 seasons. And in my opinion, he's never been as good a player. I think Jalen Ramsey's still good. I think DK Metcalf and all of that untapped potential when he is put into a structured offense. Shout out to Pete Carroll, but look, Russell Wilson and Geno Smith aren't Aaron Rodgers, right? Mm-hmm. When he's put into that type of offense, I think he'll be great. I think Aaron Rodgers is going to be better than he has been the last few years also. All because they're not going to ask him to do much. And he respects the head coach. I happen to think that Pittsburgh is going to be very good. And it's because of the reasons that you talked about with Omar Khan. They have invested in their offensive line. They have invested in their defensive line. They still have dynamic pass rushers. Don't know where all the TJ Watt getting traded talk is coming from unless they believe that they have another rusher on the other side of Highsmith, that they have a young guy, and they can use Watt to fortify even more draft capital to get that quarterback of the future we're talking about next season. But in terms of Pittsburgh, I think it's a little bit overblown that they got a lot of pieces that are kind of over the hill or past their prime. I don't agree with that. I think they're older in terms of Rodgers and somewhat Jalen Ramsey, but I don't think they're past their prime at all. At least Ramsey and DK. I think they're very good, and I think they're being added to a solid foundation. I wouldn't be surprised if Pittsburgh shocked the whole world as we head into training camp and end up being a real good team.
Yeah, the only thing I'll elaborate on is TJ Watt I don't think is going anywhere. Mm-hmm. Darius Slay also brings a lot of attitude and age and experience, and I can promise you, as you know, Tomlin's going to push all the buttons with these old guys. Like, I can't wait to be down on the field at camp whenever he's talking about, calling them old men or pushing. I mean, he does the same thing to Cam Hayward. Like he knows how to motivate these guys that are super proud, that have had wonderful careers. They're not going to just be happy, content, finishing their careers, going out with a whisper.
One of the things that I've always kind of held on to, I recall, everybody knows Mr. Class personified as Hines Ward. Hines Ward was asked about when Tomlin first took over. He was asked about Coach Mike Tomlin, how's he doing? And Hines gave a very good answer. Oh, my coach is great. He's this. He was very complimentary. And Tomlin was asked in a press conference about those comments. And this is Mike Tomlin in a nutshell. Basically, I'm going to paraphrase it. He goes, well, I appreciate that, but I'm not going to fall into the trap of having my subordinates critique me. That's like me asking you, what do you think about how your editor is doing your job? That's not the way we do things. And to me, that showed me right there. He didn't say anything bad about Hines Ward. He just said, look, everybody needs to just understand what this is. I'm his boss. He ain't mine. And even though he said something good about me, I'm not going to let this thing get set up to the point where, what if he said something bad? So the thing is that's irrelevant. I'm his boss. I'm his reporting official. It is not the way around. Even though he said something complimentary, it does not matter. To me, that is leadership in a nutshell. We are not going to just fall for something because somebody said something nice. They probably shouldn't be saying it at all because that's not their job. And I love that. I like it about Mike Tomlin. All right, we're going to get to some other teams here as we move forward in Seg 2. We're going to talk about some teams in the North, NFC and AFC. Mainly, we're going to start with the Detroit Lions because the Lions, in my opinion, got a little bit of a tough break last year, a lot of tough break when it came down to injuries and all of that. We're going to discuss whether or not injuries and coaches leaving have affected their ability to contend for a championship. We'll talk about that as we head into 2025 training camp with the 6 biggest storylines. All right, today's show is sponsored and brought to you by Monarch Money. Listen, man, ever wish managing your money felt easier? I know I do. With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch Money puts you in a driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're building wealth by managing your money. You know, how has having everything in one app made it easier for me to manage money? Well, I'm not tech savvy, so therefore I sometimes need help, and I need things right there all in one place. And you can take control of your finances like I did with Monarch Money and use the code Locked On NFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. It's monarchmoney.com, code Locked On NFL for half off your first year. All right, moving and grooving here on Locked On NFL with my main man on Friday, Matt Williamson. All right, let's talk about Detroit. I already set it up, and I told you they had a bunch of injuries last year. They were getting people back, but there's something, it's not just those 17 or 18 people. It's the new additions in free agency, it's new draft choices, it's the retirement of Frank Ragnow, the all-pro center, but it's also losing a lot of your coaching staff. Both coordinators ended up getting head jobs. One of them, Ben Johnson, was very, very sought after. He ends up going to Chicago. But first, we're going to hear from the Lions. Matt Derry talking about how the passing game can stay on track without Ben.
NFL. I'm very, very excited to see how this passing game is going to be without Ben Johnson, because I know we know how good Jared Goff is. We know how good Jared Goff is when he's protected. We saw what Ben Johnson was able to do with this offense with trick plays. But let me tell you something. When they went basic, the Lions, when they went play action and just 3rd and 6 and you needed 6 yards, you could get it.
All right. John Morton comes back in. This is a little bit different for me because it's not like they'll be starting anew. What they're doing is going to get the professor. And I say that is because John Morton, before he left to go coach elsewhere, I think it was Denver, he was one of the architects of building the foundation for the Detroit Lions. Doesn't mean it's going to stay the same. How do you think it's going to work out, Matt?
It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a real challenge. I'm a Campbell fan, but this is going to be his most challenging situation, and you laid out all the reasons why. Now, the good part is you get Hutchinson and a bunch of those defenders back because, I mean, nobody got hit harder on defense and injuries. So maybe you have to rely on the defense a little bit more. But the one thing he didn't bring up is I firmly believe it's the most difficult division in the league, too. Ooh. I mean, so the schedule and the competition is going to be brutal. And we just had a long conversation about the Steelers. And there's some teams that are used to winning. You know, the Lions aren't one of them.
Hey, they never won a Super Bowl.
Right. And they have not had a lot of success in my lifetime. That doesn't mean that they haven't turned the corner. I'm just saying challenging off seasons are new for this organization where they get pillaged, you know?
Yeah, no doubt about it. And they got pillaged. I always hated when teams, I said this about the 49ers in their new, the regime that's been there for the last decade or so. They got pillaged and didn't win anything. At least when the Rams lost all of their coaches, they got a Super Bowl out of it, right? You start breaking these teams up before they win anything because you're anticipating it. And that's what happened to the Lions this year. And guess where one of them went? One of them went, Ben Johnson went down to Chicago or over to Chicago. And now it's up to him to revitalize something that has never really been vitalized, and that is the passing game. Can he change Caleb Williams, and can he lift the Bears? That's the big question from Lauren Cox at Locked On Bears.
See Caleb Williams. Like, he's not going to get worse from what we saw this past season. And what we saw this past season was, 3,500 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Like, yeah, he took a lot of sacks and probably brought on more pressure and probably tried to do a little bit too much. But, like, the Caleb Williams we saw as a rookie, if he say he hypothetically somehow never got any better, he's still like right there as a starting caliber NFL quarterback, a low end starting caliber NFL quarterback. But like,
I expect him to get better. I expect him to improve. I expect the whole culture to improve. But just because you say it doesn't mean they're going to listen to it. Can Ben Johnson be a leader of men when he's on his own? That's the big question.
That I don't know. I'm really interested to find out because I remember Caleb Williams getting drafted, and this time of year, everyone's going, boy, no one's ever gone to a better situation than he did as a first overall pick. Well, it ended up being a nightmare. I mean, just because they had Keenan Allen and DJ Moore and drafted Adunze and all those guys, the system was a disaster. Now, this I don't think will be a schematic disaster by any stretch of the imagination. Is the head coach a Tomlin-esque or Campbell-esque leader of men. I don't know. But I do think scheme-wise and on the offensive side of the ball, we will definitely see improvement.
I think we'll see improvement too. Speaking of offense, there's just some teams, and I'll use an NBA analogy. You can use a baseball analogy. Functionally, they're not what they're supposed to be. Their foundation is a little screwed up. Their messaging is off. But they got the dudes that'll cook you. There's dudes in the NFL. There's NBA teams that'll never win, but you do not want to play for them. And I'm going to age myself here. The old Denver Nuggets under Dan Issel, nobody wanted to go play them. You weren't going to win, but they had 5 dudes that were like all pros and Hall of Famers. They'd win 20 games a year, but it's hard to go out there and play them in that atmosphere, right? There's a team just like that. They're kind of dysfunctional, and they've had another typical dysfunctional offseason. But they got the pieces that can whoop you. Is that going to be good enough in Cincinnati? Check out my man James Rapien for Locked On Bengals.
But they have the best receiver in football. That's what Jamar Chase is. And some are going to say, oh, well, no, that's Justin Jefferson, or no, it's this or that. No, it's Jamar. Jamar's the best receiver in football. Triple Crown winner, offensive rookie of the year a few years ago. When he's on the field, there's no one else like him.
No, I agree with him. A lot of people say Justin Jefferson. I'd go with Jamar Chase because of the bully ball aspect, because of his ability to accelerate when the ball is in the air. I think he's just so different. He looks like he's jogging and nobody can catch him, right? But is that going to be enough for the Bengals to run away from some of those teams that are challenging for a playoff spot? And can they make it even despite the dysfunction?
I lean towards no. I would have liked to see more change, a different philosophy of how to do things. Okay, they drafted a couple guards, but the O-line has let that team down now for basically Burrow's entire existence. And the defense is going to be one of the worst in the league yet again. I just don't see, Peacock and I just previewed the AFC North, and we were pulling out like breakout players. It was hard to pull out breakout players from Cincinnati. Who's somebody that's on the cusp of like just becoming a real star that isn't already? They're so top heavy. I love Burrow. Don't get me wrong. I love Chase. But I don't think that's enough to handle the Bills and Ravens.
The one guy that they do have that I really, really like is Cam Taylor-Britt. I think he's a real good player, but he can't do it by himself, right? Mm-hmm. He can't do it if there ain't nothing up front trying to. They still probably hadn't signed their rookie pass rusher, so he ain't been practicing. He's been standing over there, with looking like somebody on punishment. So the Bengals, man, have to overcome. They got to get out of their own way. My grandmother used to always say, don't shovel crap on yourself. The word she used wasn't crap. She used the other word that it kind of rhymes with it, but she just was like, hey, you can't do that to yourself. And the Bengals seem to be always doing that. All right, We got 2 more teams, and we'll discuss both. And then I'll get Matt's opinion on the team that I cover, the Jaguars. But before that, we're going to the NFC East to see if somebody can keep up some momentum in Washington. And then we'll go to Cleveland to see if they can start some momentum in Cleveland. We'll do that in just a second here on Locked On NFL. All right, Locked On NFL here, talking about 6 teams and 6 things heading into training camp that I believe are going to be the most talked about storylines when we get there. One of them is in the nation's capital. They had a rebirth, and in 1 year, I've never seen the turnaround in 1 year like this. This is amazing. They were the worst organization, I believe, in professional sports, regardless of what that sport is. Changed ownerships from Daniel Snyder, got a new coaching staff in there, ran a bunch of riffraff out of the front office. And all of a sudden now they're the darlings of a lot of people. But I've had hosts. I'm with David Harrison on Wednesday. He says they're fine. Julian Council on Monday says we might need to slow down a little bit. Matt, where are you on Washington and how they moved this offseason?
I think people are too excited about them. And now it's a wonderful story. I'm so glad that they're back as an organization. I'm so glad Daniel Snyder's gone. I'm so glad that they found what looks like a superstar quarterback. But history is really unkind to teams that take that massive step in 1 year. And it's such a coincidence that we just talked about the Bengals, but these 2 teams, Washington and Cincinnati, to me, have them are kind of built the same in a way that they are so offensively strong, and they go get Tunsil and they get Debo, and they did a few things on defense, but I think that defense is Again, these two teams, I think, have the biggest discrepancies of great offense, bad defense. And it's just hard to be a top-heavy team like that or a lopsided team like that.
It is. I'm going to give them a little bit of grace. Marshawn Lattimore is a good – outside of seeing Mike Evans, Marshawn Lattimore is a real good corner. Mm-hmm. They got that corner out of Ole Miss named Avery, who I really, really like in the second round. And Mikey Sanders still, man, is probably top 7, 8 nickel. Yeah. I think he's top 5 pound for pound. He's like the Allen Iverson of the NFL, him and Devontae Smith. Like, you look at him and you think, how can they do that? And then they do it. So I'll give them a little bit of grace on that back end, but that front 7 bothers me a little bit on defense.
That's what worries me.
Don't you to hear David Harrison talk about his team?
The job. Now it's time to talk about how the Commanders can stop relying on Jaden Daniels to do everything himself. Commanders quarterback Jaden Daniels had to keep too many plays alive on his own in 2024. You love that he can do it. You hate that he had to do it as much as he did. This season, Commanders have to have, I think, the personnel to help do some of that work for him. Again, going back to his own comments, throw the ball to Deebo Samuel on a quick screen, let him take it 80 yards. Let those guys do the heavy lifting for you. Jaden Daniels bailed this team out too many times in 2024. If he has to do it again in 2025, then I think by the end of the year, we'll come back here and say the upgrades.
All right, so when you take stuff off of a quarterback's plate, you can distribute that to skilled players, but it still takes the quarterback to get the skilled player the ball, even though I do agree with David. It sounds like to me they have an interior offensive line problem, and it sounds like they have a defensive problem that can't get the ball back to them. So if they're going to have limited possessions, you have to be Superman each and every time. If you have time of possession, that gives you time to run the ball and manage the game. I think it's a line of scrimmage problem, not a skill position problem.
And to take it a step further and to kind of cite some stats here, they converted almost 80% of their 4th down attempts, and they went for it a ton.
More than Detroit, probably.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they over and over and over, and they're just not going to do that again. I mean, you can't rely on converting 4th and 5s. These aren't all 4th and 1s at an 80% clip. You know, you're going to hand the ball back to the other team at a higher percentage than they did last year. That was a little fluky.
Yeah, that was a little bit fluky. I think they're going to be fine because of the quarterback, because of the coach. Yeah. I think I do like some of the additions. Laramie Tunsil has to look more like the Laramie Tunsil that played prior to 2024. Last but not least, the team that's right up the highway on the other side of Youngstown from you, and that is the Cleveland Browns. The big story for them is who the hell is going to play quarterback? They got 4 of them in camp. One of them is making a whole bunch of money, and nobody expects to see him and Deshaun Watson. The biggest thing for Cleveland is, can they find some semblance of leadership from the quarterback position? Listen to Spencer German from Locked On Browns.
There's been so much buzz about Kenny Pickett. There's been so much talk about him being a potential starter for this team come training camp. And as I've said, I don't think that makes the most sense for him to start. I don't think he's going. I don't think he is a very good quarterback or a guy that you want starting for you on a regular basis. But I'm giving him the runway here of training camp, preseason, etc., to see what he can do.
All right. The big question is, I don't know if Cleveland's any good anywhere on their roster, with the exception of defensive end and corner. But the thing I will say is this: all eyes going to be on that quarterback position because of the way they went about it in the offseason, because of Deshaun Watson and his drama. And by the way, I said they had 4 quarterbacks. They got 5. Deshaun Watson, Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, and the 2 rookies. Man, you just asking for a circus when you do things the way that they've done it. But who's going to be the quarterback, and what do you see Cleveland doing this year?
It's such a conundrum. I mean, drafting 2 is odd. And, oh, by the way, you have the Jags first-round pick next year, so you're set up to go get your guy next year. And you knew that before you drafted either one of them. So how do you divvy up reps? I mean, maybe Pickett is looking good. And, hey, I've been around him in Pittsburgh, and I don't think his book is completely written. I don't think he's ever going to be the starting quarterback you desire. Don't get me wrong. But I would imagine it's going to be a revolving door through 17 games where maybe all these guys start games. Hopefully you catch lightning in a bottle with one of the young dudes, but I bet you don't.
I don't mind them getting a running back, but they got 2 running backs.
2, come on.
I don't mind them getting a quarterback.
Right.
They took 2 quarterbacks. They could have used all of that extra capital they got and loaded up on front 7 guys, an offensive lineman, even a tight end or a safety or something, and set themselves up for next year when the cap situation will probably be a little bit better, and they'll have multiple first-round draft choices. They're confusing to me, but that's what bad teams do. So let's get to the Jaguars. I'll explain this before I ask you something. You said something a minute ago. You said teams don't really use history hasn't been kind for teams that made a turnaround. The Jaguars were the worst team I've ever seen in 2020. And then in 2021, they were worse than that. They changed coaches both years. And then finally, when they got rid of Urban Meyer, they brought in Doug Peterson. They went to the playoffs and got to the second round of the playoffs, and we were here in Jacksonville. The ebb and the flow of Jaguars, people don't realize this. In 30 years, they've been to 3 AFC championship games.
Yeah. There's some high
3.
Yeah.
And each time right after that, there was this big dip. And they got there as an expansion team, then they dipped, and then they got back there in their 4th year, and then they dipped. They waited about 17, 18 years. They got there in 2017, then they dipped, and then they got there in 2022, close to it, 1 possession away, and then they dipped again. That means that you're right. History is going to be bad for teams. So they won 4 games last year, and now they got new hope again with Liam Cohen and an entire different staff. I think history's going to be a little bit better than Jacksonville this year because that team was better than a 4-win team last year. They lost 8 games by 1 score or less. Give me your opinion on the Jacksonville Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence.
I'm excited about it. I think the organization is, you kind of indicated the roller coaster. I think that they're now climbing again, and I've been a Lawrence apologist. I understand that there's definitely some bad tape out there, a lot of it, maybe more than people even realize. But there's been a lot of first overall picks and highly touted dudes that at age 25, we still had questions about, Matthew Stafford. I mean, there's a lot of them, Peyton Manning early on, Aikman, et cetera, et cetera. His book, we're only on chapter 2, and hopefully there's 12 more chapters. You know what I mean? And his weapons to me are awesome. I have some doubts about the O-line, but I think the D is solid enough. I like the coaching hire, and I think the quarterback will live up to the contract.
You absolutely will. And I appreciate you saying that. I'm going to make sure I include that on Locked On NFL because that means we got love from somebody not in Jacksonville, and that don't happen very often, man. All right. If y'all want to find out about any team from around the National Football League and what their rosters look like as we head into training camps and some of the big questions that they have, no better place to go than Locked On NFL Scouting with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino. That is an awesome podcast, man, and it's right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Wherever you get your podcast, make sure you check out Locked On NFL Scouting. We're very, very close to training camp. We're going to start having all of these stories create themselves, and we ain't going to have to make up anything. But until then, y'all make sure y'all hang in there with us and check out Locked On NFL twice a day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. For Matt Williamson, I'm Tony Wiggins. We thank you for joining us for these 27 and a half minutes, and we'll see you next time.